This is basic operation of the Co-Pilot. The ATS manufactures for all of the Allison transmissions. This is your control box that goes inside the vehicle, so you have some user control. This is your harness, plug-and-play harness. So it has a male-female that plugs into the valve body and plugs into the computer. All the signals are passed through the harness and the Co-Pilot. That means you'll get code-free operation, which is really important when you're locking the torque converter clutch up or controlling pressures that the computer is not necessarily commanding. You want to make sure the computer is happy about it, which means no check engine lights, no fail-safe conditions. And that's one of the real common problems with the Allison transmission, because it's a very smart computer, has a lot of closed-loop operation, which is there to protect the transmission and to keep the, in some degree, rebuilders from doing old-school type modifications. So the way we approached holding the power in an Allison and getting the longevity of it is adding a computer to it, which controls this solenoid. So this is a solenoid that we add in the kit. And if you add that solenoid to the valve body, then that means that the Co-Pilot can control the solenoid and control pressure, which is the clamping force in the clutches based on engine load, which essentially when you're cruising around, driving down the street, you don't want that high line pressure. You want something that's a little bit lower line pressure. So it clamps the clutches slowly, it doesn't shift hard, it has all the real nice driving attributes, all those little things that you like out of a tranny. But on the other hand is when you put your foot into it, or you have a heavy trailer, a fifth wheel that's full of fuel and water and everything else, and you're accelerating hard, you want to make sure that those clutches get seated quickly without burning or glazing, which causes higher transmission failures. So with the addition of the Allison Co-Pilot, you can have your cake and eat it too. So I'll kind of explain the theory of operation on how this whole thing works. So this is your oil sump. This is where oil is actually in the pan. This is your pump. The pump is obviously the transmission pump that creates the pressure or creates the volume compression, and then the pressure regulator valve is your resistance, which creates the pressure. Many times when you modify a tranny, you always increase the pressure, right? Well, you have to increase the pressure to some degree to get more pressure on the clutch packs. Unique to the Allison though, the Allison already has the mainline pressure. It's a static line pressure control unit, which means from the factory it's creating about 250 psi. And it makes that pressure pretty much all the time. Factory, they'll reduce pressure when the torque converter clutch engages, also reduces pressure when fifth gear engages, which means at the higher power levels, the higher gear ratios, then pressure goes from 250, then it goes to 200 to 175. So factory Allison will make 175 psi maximum line pressure, which 175 psi maximum line pressure is enough pressure to apply the clutches at modified power levels. Only there's a caveat to this. Allison decided to add a trim valve, and the trim valve is really what threw people for a loop and what makes the Allison very finicky as far as understanding how to make it hold at heavier power and maintain your drivability. So the way this works, you have the pump that creates the volume, you have the pressure regulator valve that creates the pressure because of the resistance. You have your shift valve that the computer controls to tell the transmission which gear to be in. It applies the clutch packs. You have the trim valve, which is unique to the Allison. The trim valve is basically a mini pressure regulator that is between the shift valve and the clutch pack. And this trim valve is a little regulator that as pressure goes from the pressure regulator valve to the shift valve, then from the shift valve to the trim valve, it trims pressure back. So in a perfect world, we have 250 psi in the Allison, right? That's going to apply the clutches. Most trannies, it goes from the shift valve directly to the clutch pack. Allison added this trim valve to trim that pressure back. And that trim valve is not actuated by anything except for hydraulics inside the unit. So what we do is we add a solenoid here, the one I just showed you in the valve body. This solenoid is controlled by the Co-Pilot, and this solenoid controls reaction pressure on the trim valve. So during the shift, when you're cruising down the road and the shift takes place and the clutches begin to apply, we let the trim valve do its normal actuation. So it's trimming pressure to the clutch packs and you have a nice clean shift. Well, at the end of the shift, then we start to modulate this solenoid. And at the end of that shift, we modulate the solenoid so we can modulate full line pressure to the clutch pack. So that does a couple of things. One, it allows the clutch to engage and it's more consistent based on engine power. So if engine power is low, we don't do anything. As you increase the torque of the engine and that power starts to go up, then we start to modulate the solenoid in the Co-Pilot, and we modulate this trim valve. By modulating this trim valve, we match line pressure to the clutch pack during the end of the shift only at higher power levels. So that doesn't cause the shift daps to kind of migrate, which creates all kinds of drivability issues. It also allows the tranny to only have clutch pack pressure when we want it. That means we don't stick delivery rings, we don't wear out clutch packs, we don't have all those negative attributes from running very high line pressure. That's why Allison kind of did that, because they wanted the higher line pressure. They've got big clutches, but they didn't need the higher pressure because the engine's only rated for, say, 350 horsepower stock. So as we start increasing the power that's going into this transmission, and we start putting really heavy loads in the back of it, then all of a sudden these clutch packs are beginning to fail because they don't have full line pressure. So not having full line pressure to them makes you have to overbuild the clutches and do all these crazy things, drill out orifices, put maybe valves in it that have springs on them. Well, all that stuff, it never gets you to the full line pressure, but it kind of helps, and it makes a okay working tranny, but it doesn't give you exactly what you want as far as a perfectly shifting tranny, a transmission that will go 500,000 miles without wearing out. That's all kind of things that have to happen with the electronics by adding the Co-Pilot solenoid. So now the other part of the Co-Pilot for the Allison is the torque converter clutch operation. And this is really the fun part. Having the torque converter clutch engaged when you're under power, whether you're heavy power or just driving around, that's the real benefit that the Co-Pilot will allow you to have really good control over when the torque converter clutch engages. The factory torque converter clutch doesn't engage at heavier power levels like wide open throttle. If you smash it to the ground and you accelerate from the stop, the torque converter clutch will never engage at full throttle until somewhere around 80 or 90 miles per hour. On the other hand, is the torque converter clutch sometimes won't disengage when you're under low boost levels and you're driving around and you kind of get a bogging sensation. So the Co-Pilot ties the torque converter clutch into engine power directly. And it makes it really, we've done all the science behind there, and it just is engine load based. Drivability is superb. You'll love the way it works, and it's one of those things that spend a lot of time on it. So if you have any more technical questions regarding the way the pressure works in the Co-Pilot or the torque converter clutch control, call our tech staff here at ATS. We've got a lot of guys on the phone. They're all very educated. They'd love to spend time with you talking about it. So short of that, hopefully this was very helpful for you.